So yeah, sometimes I'll get these texts and people feel like I shamed them just by coming out about my story and saying, "Oh, this was painful for me." And I'm not. This is just my experience. And I'm for the record, most of the pain, Emiliana, came after.
The sun forsake me and the moon forgave me. Welcome everyone to the Awakened Journalist. I am so excited to tell you who our guest on this podcast is today. My name is Emiliana Molina. We do conscious journalism for the good of humankind. And I have with me Vannessa Spiva. She's an alternative and holistic health service provider, and she's the founder of Sacred Soul Energetics. She guides conscious leaders to heal emotionally and to expand into their highest purpose. And she does this through energetic and subconscious modalities. She's going to explain to us a little bit about this before we start the interview. And I am also currently working with Bani, which is why we chose to do this interview as well, because her work is simply phenomenal. So Bani, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Amazing. So to get started, one, who is Vannessa Spiva and what is Sacred Soul Energetics?
Thank you. I'll keep it simple, but it might be very deep. I'm an alchemist. I alchemize myself and I help other people alchemize their life experiences. And that's what I believe life is about is yes, transformation. We all hear that word a lot, right? Like, oh, I want to transform. I'm on this transformational journey, which is valid, it's good, it's powerful, but also alchemy, because I think that has a different energy when we alchemize one thing into something else. So that's who I am, is I'm an alchemist at my core. So I've alchemized my own life, still doing it every day. The destination doesn't really end. There's milestones and then there's more work. And
Always.
yeah, always, always. And then Sacred Soul Energetics is my company. And the theme around it is for all of us to remember and recognize and bring to awareness how sacred our life experiences are. And I came to that recognition through my own life. And I thought, man, I used to feel like my life was horrible, or it was empty, or it was painful. And all of those things can still be true. Like I've had painful experiences. Yes, who hasn't? But at the end of the day, there's like this sacredness to who we are, to the experiences that we're having, for better or for worse. And I know a lot of people that might be triggering, and I understand that, but that's just my takeaway, my philosophy through my life and the people that I help. But at the end of the day, we're all sacred souls, and we're just coming back to that sacredness one day at a time.
I love that. And let's dive a little bit into energetic and subconscious modalities and the work that you do, right? Like, what does that mean for the people that don't understand it? And we'll keep it simple too, because then I'm going to dive deep into some of Vana's life experiences, her fear of failure, being a high functioning individual and on drugs while she was at work, and also how she ended up falling unconsciously into the sex industry for 10 years. And some of those experiences led her to develop this beautiful work of energetic and subconscious modalities. So, what is it?
Yes. So everything is energy in our world, although we forget because things seem like matter, right? Like this microphone at the bottom of my screen seems like it is a physical thing, but it's a lot of energy that goes into making this thing into matter. But to keep it simple, we have energy fields around us, and anything that we experience in our life physically actually starts in the energetics of our bubble, of our aura, of our space, our room, our house. Like everything starts in the energy first, which is tied to our thoughts. Our thoughts are energy, our emotions are energy. So when we're doing deep healing, yes, we can start to express things to someone, right? Like I could tell you my story, you could tell me yours. And that's communication. That's like the first step. But there's so much more to that with energetic modalities like energy healing. And yes, that includes Reiki, but I do like a shamanic energy blend of healing. I do reconnective healing. There's all these different modalities with different names, but they're meant to work with the energetics. And the energetics have the biggest impact on our subconscious. And that's where some of my subconscious modalities come in. And I do a practice called IFS therapy as well. That stands for internal family systems, or it's called part work. And that allows us to really communicate with the different parts of our psyche, whether they are unconscious, whether they are overprotective parts, whether they are alter ego personalities, which I think is pretty common. Most of us are aware that we have like this alter ego. So, yeah, that's like the nutshell of subconscious and energetic modalities.
I love that. And your work is beautiful because, yes, we all have that alter ego. And, doing therapies or sessions like this one can really guide us into just working with that part of ourselves instead of like rejecting it or denying it, just truly understanding it. And then from that point, choosing if we want to create new behaviors or stay the same. But sometimes there was this one phrase that we said one time together. I think you said it, and it was like change happens when the pain of staying the same is more. I think we talked about this in
Yeah,
discussions. So
yeah. When the pain of staying the same is more than the pain of changing, that's when we actually go for it. And we're like, you know what? No more. I have nothing to lose. I'm tired of it. I mean, it's great if we can catch it before then, but for the most of us, honestly, that's where it's at.
that's where it's at for sure. Yeah. So I love that, and I think it's a beautiful way to work with our alter ego and our psyche and the energetics, right? Like really understanding that, and then from that point choosing how we want to change our behaviors, choices, patterns, etc. And allow those unconscious beliefs or patterns to become conscious. Um, all right,
Yes.
Bonnie, so not a lot of people know that um, throughout your career, you were in politics at one point. So
Yeah, I don't talk about that one that much.
I know. And I was so surprised when you told me, because we went through your whole story and I loved hearing it. And I remember telling you that I was so impressed by you because of the way that you shared, your challenges and your struggles with so much grace, especially being in such difficult worlds such as politics and also the sex industry. So I want to guide you first into the political part of it, which eventually also leads into how you landed in the sex industry. Tell me a little bit about that stage in your life.
Cool. Yeah. So with politics, I mean, I just picked a major when I was in college at 17. I don't know how I ended up there so early. Most people start college when they're 19, but anyway, I remember just I was kind of thinking like law, and now I understand why. I'm about humanity, right? And so the work that I do is about healing humanity, but at that time in my life at 17, all I could think about was humanity. I didn't know what else would go with that. And when I was like looking at majors, I don't know, somehow political science just had the humanity piece, at least from my point of view at that time. And then I got a bachelor's degree in political science, and then I worked for a paralegal company. And by that time, the work that I was doing in the industry and the other industry had already started when I was 19. So it was kind of happening simultaneously. And then after working for a paralegal company, I was like, you know what? I need more growth. I need to do something more. And then I got my master's degree in public policy, or excuse me, yeah, public policy and government from Pepperdine in Malibu. And then from there, that's when I started to do small internships for some local city council persons in LA. And then eventually I ended up at a congressperson's office locally. even though they're a federal congressperson. And so I did that for some time. And then I did some lobbying, which is like the other, it's all political, but it's more of like the sales portion in politics. And so I was just exploring. I think for me, I was definitely trying to discover how I can contribute to the world, but I quickly found out that that wasn't it. I was like, oh, there's a system here, and it has its own agenda,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to change this current agenda. And you got to just kind of get in line and be a part of the automation um, in the factory, right? From my point of view, and I didn't fit into that. So it didn't last long until I was like, you know what? I'm done. And then I jumped into real estate shortly after.
I love that. Okay, so during that time in politics, I don't know if it was around like the same time frame or not, but you were also very high functioning and doing a lot of drugs, and also stumbled into the sex industry. Which were they like correlated one another, or did one start before the other one, like the drugs and the sex industry at the same time, or was it one before the other?
um, so professionally, the politics didn't start until I probably wasn't it 25. 25 years old is when I professionally, not just with my schooling, but when I professionally started doing internships and working in political offices.
Okay.
The sex industry stuff started when I was 19 because for me, that was a way for me to pay for my intuition,
Okay.
stay in school, I wouldn't have been able to finish my bachelor's degree in political science if it wasn't for that. And
Yeah.
then, and even though I was working for a paralegal company, somehow I kept all of these balls going at the same time. And I mean, it was a good distraction, right? And there was a part of me that was kind of unconscious. Like my life was so compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And we can look at that as a positive thing, or and then if it goes on too long, it could really be negative because someone is not really taking into the consideration of who they are. They're so busy like being like, okay, this is studious school Vannessa over here. This is party Vannessa at the nighttime job over here. And this is professional Vannessa. And just wearing all those hats can be like fun and entertaining until it really starts to wear down because where's the authentic self?
Yeah.
It's like not there. And for me, that's what part of my story when things started to really weigh on me later in my 20s after being in wearing all these different hats, you know, dealing with tuitions and student loans. Sometimes I was paying for my tuition in cash and other times I was taking out a lot of loans. It was just a fluctuation and that was stressful. And then there was times where I would study really hard and, master's degree obviously take a lot of work and time.
Yeah.
And there was also this self-worth piece, is I felt like I wasn't worthy at being at the school that I was at for my master's degree. And so I was constantly trying to prove myself to other people, but no one cared, right? And that's always how it goes. So really, I was looking for my own self-approval and didn't know this. I was still unconscious to all of this at that time. And I think, Emiliana, on one of our calls, I said something to you about me being an overachiever, and I was like, I was so scared of failure. I was loading my plate with so much. And I look back now and I'm like, there's no way I could have failed. Even if I would have lightened my load or taken more time, or maybe quit the adult industry a little sooner, or maybe even quit the politics a little sooner, or maybe, and I don't have any regrets, but there was an awareness of why, like, wow, I was so hard on myself. And that was a lesson for me to learn and to see and bring that unconscious aspect, like fully bringing it to the conscious, because it started to repeat a little bit while I have been getting my emotional healing and my spiritual business going. It'll come in at times, right? Me being hard on myself. And then I'll bring more awareness to it. And then I'll just keep going on that journey.
Yeah. I love that. And I love our phone calls because we go into really, really deep conversations, and I'm probably gonna have to bring you back on the podcast, because we just talk about so much. But I want to go into what triggered that initially, and just to honor you and where you are at your process too. Like, it's so admirable that yes, you may have stumbled upon the sex industry by mistake, and though at the same time it had a higher purpose, and you did it also to be able to pay for your tuition and to be able to, you know, uh, succeed in life through, what you viewed as success at that moment in time too. But what was that initial trigger or that subconscious pattern that led you to stumble into the sex industry?
Great question. And before I answer that, I just want to say, I don't know if I would say I stumbled into it by a mistake.
Okay.
It wasn't intentional either. So there is a little bit of gray area there,
Yeah.
but I want to take full accountability for my decision at that time. I don't want to be like, oh, I just was like, oh, oops, here it is. It
Yeah.
wasn't, it was kind of like that just because of where my awareness was. But
Yeah.
I still think that everything was perfectly planned, and I'm a conscious person. I call my beliefs energetic or spiritual. So people might understand what that might entail when they're listening to me explain some of this. But I would say, again, it wasn't intentional. I was on Craigslist looking for some extra work. And I think I ran across something that said something about like massages. And I was like, oh, cool, I can give massages.
Yeah.
Um, but when I showed up, it was a completely different story. Now, the pattern that you asked about is the unconscious pattern is the fawn response. And that's one of the four major trauma responses. And up until 30, just for the record, my whole life, like when I unpack it, and I don't have any shame about it, I love it. I'm like, oh, wow, this is so juicy and good. But my whole life was being ran by these trauma responses. And I thought I was the trauma response. Like I thought, like, oh, I'm just this passive person when there's a lot of pressure. And it's like, no, 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 sweetheart, you went through so much trauma and drama that you were protecting yourself. You thought that by going along with the flow and not putting up a fight would be a lot easier than trying to put up a fight and run out of the room when I thought I was there to do massages, right? And so there was nothing against my consent. Again, this is me taking full accountability. And I love doing this because not you, Emiliana, but I know like when I do this with in other conversations, people are just like, oh, wow, like you're really going there. You're really, how are you able to do that? How are you able to take full accountability? And it just comes down to I love my experience.
Yeah.
Like there's so much medicine in it for me at my current age. Like me as a 36-year-old, I'm thanking younger Vannessa for for just launching herself into growth in the way that she did without knowing. So that fawn response, and for anyone who doesn't know, the fawn response is just kind of giving away your power, not putting up a fight, not speaking, just not really honoring your own wants. People pleasing is a part of it, but it doesn't define all of the fun response. So when
Yeah.
I found myself in a situation, I just was like, and there was a little bit of desperation too. I was spiritually probably trying to not find myself spiritually, but find what my beliefs are in the universe. Like, am I fully supported? Do I have to do this? Like, is this my last resort? And at that time, I believed it was, but it really wasn't. But now I know that, right? Like now I'm like, my faith in the divine and in the universe and in myself and my subconscious and my higher self, like all these other energies that are working in co-creation with me, my belief is just like absolutely unbelievable. Like when I look back, I'm like, whoa, how did I get here? And I'm like, oh, I know because I had to learn it. Some people would say I'm putting up air quotes the hard way, but I just learned it the real way. That's how I like to say it. So that fawn response, and just kind of giving away my power. And I did that for a lot and in a lot of different situations for a long period of time. But that also led me to this point where there was a day where I was like, no more, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then I started to feel how worthy I am. And then I started to feel how deserving I am. And it was very subtle. And I remember this is just a small clip of my story. I remember being in the strip club one night I was like one of the top girls there, so I kind of had special privileges, and I don't brag about that. It was it was stressful. I was also people pleasing on a different level. Um, and just trying to deal with the ownership at that club and the politics and the managers and all that. But I remember one night kind of having to stay there until 6 a.m. because I had overindulged in alcohol so much.
Yeah.
But what was running through my, and I was just talking and venting to one of the managers who was like a friend, right? We were kind of like relaxing and hanging out while everyone else was working. But I remember just like telling him how frustrated I was with my life. So it was like an unintentional therapy session
Yeah.
with the drinking, which I don't promote drinking, but right, but that's just like where I was at that time. That was what I needed to do in order for me to become aware. And I mean, I didn't really remember that whole night until my friend or the manager came back the next day and he was like, "Hey, this is some of the stuff that you were saying." And I was like, "Really?"
Yeah.
And I realized I was in a rock bottom because I was making so much money. By that time, I was already done with my master's degree. People who didn't know that my double life had like this view, like, oh my God, she has it together. She's working for a lobbying company and she has 2 degrees and she's young and smart and like all this stuff. And like, and if anything, they thought I had a robust social life because I was always out at night, but they didn't know like to what extent, right? So everyone thought I had it together, but really that was like my darkest place. And then I still had to stay at that. Well, I didn't have to, but I still stayed an extra 2 years because it was so hard to pull away from the attachment that I created with the kind of money that I was making there. And then also the kind of validation and attention I was getting there. I think that was a little bit stronger than the money piece.
Yeah.
So that's that in a nutshell.
I love that. I love that, Bunny. And to give people a little bit of context and background, the first time we met, we actually met at Oreo Leaders, and we started talking, and we ended up talking, I think, for like a good 4 hours, just telling each other our stories. And in the first conversation, we went really deep into well, my work in the news industry and what I went through in that. Also, a very difficult situation that I co-created astrally, that has a lot to do with like sexual harassment and whatnot. And we went into your experience as well in the sex industry. And I remember just being in awe and mind blown by the grace in through which you share your story. And I told you this at that point, the accountability that you share your story with as well. And uh, the fact that you own it and are truly just putting these experiences in service for like a higher good and a higher purpose. And and then I explained to you what I did, that I guide heart-led, excellence-driven leaders uh, and transformation leaders to voice their hearts to freedom of expression and authenticity. And you were like, oh my gosh, that sounds like me. And I was like, actually, yes. And you're my most advanced student. Like, well, not student at that point because we weren't working together at that point, but just so people know, Vanya and I did an exchange. So she's supporting me with Sacred Soul Energetics, and I'm supporting her in voicing her heart's truth and starting her own podcast. And that's where we're at right now. But I told her, I was like, you're like just truly showing me like what I'm working towards with other people. And I shared with you that the hardest part for me is supporting others into coming into full accountability of their story. Because with my experience in the news industry, we're going to make mistakes publicly. And I made mistakes all the time on television, and I had to own those mistakes. And oftentimes, news personalities or public figures don't do that publicly. But if we are creating this new humanity, and if we are these heart-led, excellence-driven transformational leaders, it is so important for us to own our story, own our mistakes, and then just share like what we learned from them and move forward. And you do that beautifully. So I want to honor you for that and for taking that accountability for all your stories, even though they have been obviously extremely painful and challenging. And with that said, I love that you guided us into the whole strip club experience and how you landed and stumbled into the Craigslist ad as well, like a massage. So, yes, it's beautiful that you take accountability, and also at the same time, it does feel like the ad was a little deceiving, right? And obviously, you and I are very spiritual, so we understand that there's a co-creation behind that and a higher purpose. And also, though, it was very deceiving. So I'm sure
Yes.
that was very challenging.
Yeah. But in the moment I remember, and there was some preliminary conversations, like there was definitely a progression. So yes, the ad was misleading. And then I had some other chances too. Um, but that's where that desperation, this is where our limiting beliefs come in. And this is a lot of it's a big piece of my work right now, right? When we're dealing with the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind, we're going to run into those deepest seated limiting beliefs like, oh, I have to do this, or I can't do this, or I can't get the resources that I need any other way. It's like those are the limitations that we create for ourselves, and at the bottom of that they're almost always around self-worth, um, at some point in time. And if not that, there's a few other main ones. um, but yeah, I just rose to the occasion. And I will say that I got out of that initial situation with, the guy that kind of introduced me to it, at that who put up the ad in that time frame. I really didn't stick along around with him too much longer. We were probably working together, however you want to call it, for maybe a month. And then after that, but since I was already exposed to the industry, I just went to go find a better version of it somewhere else. Right. So at that point, I was totally agreeing to it. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But again, it comes down to uh, I just didn't know how valuable, how sacred my soul was. However, I needed to experience it for myself. I needed to learn what it's like. Um, and you talked about the word mistake, and I like to break words down. And it's like, how does that come out in writing? Mistake. So it's almost like you just weren't able to take in everything the first time that you needed in order to be fully aware or fully in your power, or da 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 da, right? Whatever the other outcome might be. So these mistakes, they're really just like, oh, it was a mistake, right? Just retake the photo, just redo the thing, just take what you're getting from that mistake so that you could have a good take later. But without those mistakes, we're not getting the good takes, right? From the lesson, from the experience. And then, yeah, and then by the way, for anyone listening, I guess we haven't stated this, but my journey lasted 10 years in that industry. And again, I started to really use it for my best advantage, and it gave me a lot of stability. And I don't condone it, and I'm not um, punishing, or I'm not shaming, that's the word. I'm not shaming anyone on either side, because every time I do a podcast like this, I get texts about mainly from, men who
Okay.
participate, and they, people from my past find me. Like I told you about that Instagram account that I have disconnected from, like my old life, the one with the 30,000 followers, because I wanted to start fresh. And it's not that I'm running from anything, but I have a stray hair somewhere. That's why I'm doing that on the camera. But so yeah, sometimes I'll get these texts, and people feel like I shamed them just by coming out about my story and saying, oh, this was painful for me. And I'm not. This is just my experience. And I'm, for the record, most of the pain, Emiliana, came after.
Yeah.
When I had my awakening in 2016 on my 30th birthday, that's when I felt all the pain from the 10 years. I don't know if I was because I was numb, and I had these heart walls and boundaries, and I was in these different parts of my psyche that were these alter egos that were running my consciousness and my personality. I had this studious one that was getting straight A's over here in economics, and I had this other party one, and then I had this, family Vannessa, and like the good daughter, like all these different personalities that I was tapping into at different times. So I think that distracted me a little bit from all of the emotions. That's how I became clear on, okay, I want to do emotional healing, because what I desperately needed during that time, and maybe I wasn't receptive to it or ready for it, which is why I wasn't tapped into it, but I was very disconnected from my emotions. And so if anyone has a question like, how can she be in the sex industry? How can someone do that? That is so immoral. How do I say that? Immoral?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Terms that I don't really resonate with, I can never pronounce.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh.
Come out right if I can't get it right.
Yeah.
So anyway, people might be asking like, how was that possible? Well, I was so disconnected from my emotions. I was so used to suppressing my emotions, blocking my emotions, disowning them, undermining them. Like, oh, I'm not really angry, or oh, I'm not that uncomfortable. Like, I'll be fine. Like, really invalidating myself along the whole time. And that's why I really want to emphasize to everyone, my brand is about reminding us how sacred our soul is, how sacred your experience is, even if you feel like you do have a lot of mistakes, even if you feel like you're not accountable for your story and you feel like you had a little less sovereignty than I did. Anyone hearing me, they can kind of sense that I had a lot of sovereignty at different points. And so I kept going with the work that I was in. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the sex industry that don't have any sovereignty. And I have a lot of compassion, and I get emotional every time I think about it and talk about it. And that's why I want to bring this topic up. Even though my experience, I wasn't trafficked or anything like that, but just the whole topic around this adult industry, we need to start talking about it, because there's a lot of injustices happening and I don't know the answer. I don't I don't know what it looks like. I just know that not being transparent, and I know a lot of women like myself and men who also participate in the same thing I did, and they make it in some other industry or realm or something, and they never mention a thing about it, or they undermine it completely. Right. And they're like, oh, I just had one experience like that. But because I worked with them or I know them from the past, I was like, wow, this person did it for 5 years. And I just heard them on a podcast say they did it for 1 month. Interesting. Right. But that's okay. No judgment. Like, it takes time to accept your story and to accept your accountability in it, even if you do feel like, for instance, I'm like, hey, I was in these trauma responses, but at the same time I still chose the path. Right. So
And this is like one of the reasons why like I love you so much, and like I just admire you because there's people that oftentimes come into our lives, and everyone's a mirror and a reflection, but I love working with you because you invite me forward as well. Like this relationship that we're building is truly like when I talk about, my core values in guiding people to speak their truth on podcasts or camera or traditional news outlets, I always ask them, you need to agree to speaking your heart's truth with transparency and accountability. And if you cannot do that, that's okay if your heart's truth is different than mine. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, whatever. I just need to make sure that you are living in truth and integrity and sharing from that space. And if you don't, I'm going to feel it. And I am not going to work with you, and I am not going to support you in expanding your voice and becoming a megaphone for your story, because I can't support something that is fake, feels fake, or that is lying. And this is one of the things that I admire about you the most, because you truly are so embodied in your truth and your accountability. And that is so hard to find. Like, the example you just gave about the podcast. So I applaud you for that. And I trust that right now you are serving as an example of what just being honest and accountable about our stories looks like without punishing ourselves or shaming ourselves because of the path that we have chosen to live, right? And with that said, I know there's a big issue with sovereignty as well for me in the news industry, and I kind of just want to bring your story full circle, right? Because we're running out of time, but I'm definitely going to bring you back on so that we can continue this conversation because it goes way, way deeper than this. But sovereignty, there's two things that you've mentioned throughout your story, right? Like choosing this path because of lack of self-worth, and then also giving your power away at one point in time. So, what is, two questions here. The first one, what is that one pattern or that one thing that you can say was very vulnerable for you in your self-worth, and that led you to choose this path and then be able to recognize it, to say, okay, 2 years later, after I recognized I was hitting rock bottom, I was now then able to choose a different path.
Great question. I think it was self-sacrificing.
Okay.
It was this belief that I needed to self-sacrifice myself in order to be around, in order to make it in life, in order to, have stability for myself, or in order to, I don't know, make something of myself. I felt like I had to sacrifice like who I was. And I came from a family where I probably felt like I was a burden for most of my life. Like, I tried not to ask for too much, tried to be as quiet as possible, that kind of thing. Or if I did speak up, I made sure it was like my last resort. And so that kind of carried me, but that's what I needed to experience and heal from, so that I could also, accept myself and be like, no, 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 I need to speak up. Like, this is going to make the other person uncomfortable. But guess what? I'm not responsible for their emotions. I'm responsible for my emotions. And I'm not going to self sacrifice. I'm not going to run into the ground. I'm not going to disown my body or my energy. As crazy as backwards as it sounds, I started to care more about my energy than my body, but that led me to care about my body more, for the record. That's just where I was at. That's where I had to start, because I started to feel a lot of energetic things. I was kind of out of my body and you can kind of hint why, like, why was she out of her body? What was kind of work that I was doing, right? So the energy was able to speak to me a little bit more clearly. And I just want to touch on this thing with shame and transparency and compassion. Shame and compassion first. So shame is what keeps us in our secrets. We feel like we will be disowned. We feel like people will ridicule us, betray us, yell at us. We just feel like we will be excommunicated from the community or our family or our friends. And so that's what keeps people from speaking out. But the experience that you had, even if it wasn't pleasurable, there's still something sacred about your story, and it has to come out in the right environment, in the right space, at the right time. And you may not know what that is going to look like. You don't need to know what that's going to look like. Just have the intention to release a little bit of shame each day and get the support that you need to do that. And eventually you will start to crave transparency. And that's it. That craving for me, it made me a little impulsive at one point last year when I told you I did my first podcast coming out about my story. It was like I woke up, I was just like, I already was scheduled to be on a podcast, but I was just like, it wasn't supposed to be this topic. It was supposed to be a different topic. Um, I'm going to shout out my friend Sam with the Soul Seeker podcast.
Love it.
I wish I had that number so people could go look at it, but I don't. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes. But anyway, so I just had this impulsiveness, like I have to be transparent. And, you know, I had a vulnerability hangover. So I want to let people know that's a real thing, right? When you talk to your partner or your friend or your family member about something for the first time, you might have a vulnerability hangover. It's okay. It will pass, just like a regular hangover.
Yeah.
It might take 4 hours. It might take 2 hours. Drink a
Yeah.
lot of water, get some rest. go out in nature just like you kind of would, I guess, for some of us who have that awareness, we would when we overindulge in anything else. But just know it will pass. And that's where the work is. You're in the trenches. You're going through the shame. That's what it feels like to actually go through it and not to stop when you just see the door,
Yeah.
right? You open up the door and you're like, I'm walking through. That's where the vulnerability hangover happens. It will pass. But guess what? When you start to be transparent, there's a whole other side of freedom that you did not know existed. The fact that I could speak about this and no one can blackmail me for anything. I mean, I told you I get those little texts because people feel guilty, right? And they find me and they follow me
Yeah.
for some reason, no matter how many times I keep recreating myself. And
Yeah.
I don't mind. It's like, hey, cool, all good. Like I don't hide anything about where I'm at or what I'm doing these days, even if it's completely different from where I was at. That's just my transformation. But it
That's
will
their
set you
undealt
free.
process too. It feels like it's, they haven't dealt with that, and you're just through your own truth and storytelling and sharing your own experiences, you're bringing it up for them to deal with
Yeah,
and to become accountable for. And they're
yeah.
not there yet, and that's
And
okay.
part of my job with this message is to trigger people out of complacency. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
just
And
it,
I
right?
love you for it. This is amazing.
I mean, I triggered myself out of my own complacency because I was a healer and no one knew about my past because I wasn't talking about it. I was like, oof, I'm not really growing, as much as I would like. I'm kind of hiding. I'm kind of maintaining out of safety. But I just want to, I'll wrap up my statement with this before I pass the mic back to you is that there's so much more freedom on the other side of transparency. And even if you think that, people will be disappointed or hurt in the interim, it's probably true, right? Depending on what your situation is. But just remind yourself, and you could still love people. You could still have compassion. You could still want to keep, have some kind of relationship with them, whether it's family or whatever. You can find some kind of middle ground where you guys can hold compassion for each other once you start to have that transparency. But please remember that you are not responsible for their emotions. You're responsible for your emotions and your actions. And so if you need to apologize to people, you can. You could do anything that you need to do. But please don't hold back your story just because you think that other people will feel a certain way because you're not responsible for their emotions. Your soul is sacred. Your experience is sacred.
Exactly. Bane, it's currently 2:20. This interview is being pre-recorded, just so everyone knows, but Bane has an appointment that she has to get to, I believe, in 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So just to close up, and I think we're gonna do probably a part two on this, or Bane will
Yeah.
definitely come back because our conversations just go so much deeper than this. Um, but to finish and wrap up, I want to end on the note of giving away your power and how you shifted from that to reclaiming your full sovereignty, right? And sometimes people think that that's easy and they see you now doing your own business and entrepreneurship, but you gave the example of, from the point where you hit rock bottom until 2 years after was when you finally like chose and had the strength and courage to fully leave the industry and recreate yourself from this different perspective. But what is an advice or words of wisdom that you could give people of tools that have worked for you in reclaiming your power?
I love that. Tools. Number one, mirror work. It might sound like a vain practice. It's a self connection practice. And it's just as simple as it sounds. Get a mirror and start talking to yourself. There's one big rule. You got to look into your own eyes, deep into your own pupils, to try to get close up into the mirror so that you're not looking at the things in the background in the mirror. But have a real conversation with yourself.
Which can be very hard at first, just so people know. And
Very
once you
hard.
get past it, it is beautiful. It
Yes.
is beautiful.
I cried
Oh my
very
God.
hard my first time doing mirror work. And then I yelled.
Same. And then
But
I
now it
started
comes to
dancing
the
at the
mirror and
end.
I'm like, hi, love. Now it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, you are this divine feminine, blah, blah. It's just like, whoa, like this.
I love it.
Inspirational thing in the morning, like if you were to hear me outside my bathroom. But it didn't start that way. But yes, you get over the hump for anyone who wants to try that.
I love it. It started pretty similar for us both. Me not being able to look at myself in the mirror, truly
Yep.
just
Huge.
hating myself, going through self-hatred and shame, then screaming, crying in fetal position and cradling myself, and eventually shifting into like just dancing and okay, I can look at myself. And I started dancing and singing, and then now it's at a point where I'm also looking at myself and saying, I love you. I'm so grateful for you. You're trying so hard. Like I see you. You got this. So that is very, very powerful work for anyone that hasn't done it. I highly recommend it as well. Anything else you want to add, Bunny, before we say goodbye?
I'll just say one other tool is to verbal journal. I know some people have challenges with like written journaling, and it's because we need to actually get the energy out of our throats through our words, through sound and light, which is sound. And so getting it out, verbally and doing that on a recorder that you feel safe with, whether it's an old school one or an app. And you could just start very simple, but that kind of verbal journaling will allow you to increase your self awareness, and it will allow you to get comfortable with your own feelings and your own thoughts.
I love that. And for those people that want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yes, sacredsoulenergetics.com. If you go there on the first page, you can enter to win a free session with me.
I love that. I love that. There you go, you guys. You have a freebie with Vannessa. I truly recommend her. We've had already like a good five sessions together, I think, and multiple conversations, like me with her, experiencing her work. Um, and I can tell you that I've done my fair share of workshops, trainings, and traditional therapy. I told Vannessa one time to a therapist dropped me. And we talked about this. It was hilarious, but it was kind of painful back then, guys. I'm laughing now. It was painful then. She, yeah, I won't get into the story, but basically she said she was shocked that I was like really advanced, and I guess she didn't know how to work with me moving forward. But so that's what Vannessa brings to the table, that she is that advanced, and way more
Can I
than,
add to that?
of course, of course.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say emotional healing is about finding resolve, right? So it's not about just talking in circles, right? That some not all traditional therapists, but emotional healing has a different energy to it. Emotional integration, emotional expansion. So whether you seek help from me or anyone else, just make sure there's an intention to reach some kind of resolve. And
Yeah,
that's how. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and with that said, you guys have her
Ah,
website if you want to work with her. And thank you for tuning into The Awakened Journalist, where we do conscious journalism for the good of humankind. We'll see you next time.
I traveled far to support the sun, nestled in the sand. On the way, I found myself holding my own hand. Eagles there, I thought I knew would soar with me in flight. Leading out instead, I cried alone into the night. The sun forsook me and the moon forgave me. So I turned my songs to the sea. My back supported as I leaned on boulders and found myself in family. Goldilocks into a bed, I woke to angels' call. Christmas helped to turn the page and made it safe to fall. Told to stay and hold the moon in non-existent space. Returned our prayers to Yemajah, candle fireplace. The sun I turned my songs to the sea. My back supported as I lean on boulders and found myself in family. I weave feathers for the cedar, shells for the Amazon. Dance cha-cha on the beach all night until the break of dawn. Didn't see the sun again until the week was through. Okay, around the foreign land, back from the horse I flew. The sun forsake me and the moon forgave me. So I turned my songs to the sea. My back supported as I lean on boulders and found myself in family. My back supported as I